Just starting off, I think that scoping is one of the most important parts of having a successful Business Central implementation. Scoping is not only an exercise where the partner is trying to figure out exactly what we need to do. It should be a collaborative effort with the customer and the partner. We're both trying to arrive at that same goal of having that successful implementation. This is where the customer needs to make sure that they're coming forward with all of those things that they've built up over the years with their current system. Hey, we have these pain points that we just kind of keep not addressing, they're just lingering. Can we have these fixed? But also not just looking at, hey, these are kind of the skeletons in the closet, but also going forward and saying every single area that we want to have in Business Central, right? We need to have an agreed upon scope. This needs to be well defined from a process perspective. I'd like to say that nothing ever changes after the initial scoping engagement and that we have that agreed upon scope. But as we go through the multiple months of an implementation project, inevitably things arise. But we want to minimize that as much as possible. Everything we can find up front, we want to do that. At the end of the day, some of the biggest risk is going to be scope change, scope creep. That is really what is going to upset a project timeline, a project budget. And at the end of the day, that scope creep, scope change is a product of mismanaged expectations. That's just, hey, one party didn't know exactly what they were getting out of this project. That's why we want to make sure that that collaborative experience is there so that these open and honest conversations can happen. This is something that wasn't planned for, and this is how we can move forward and address it. If we need to change something to include it, if we need to extend the system, or if we can change a process around it, I think that that's the best way to manage risk, is to still just have that strong relationship, a very open and honest conversation. I think every single project that we undertake here at Volt, we put an emphasis on that upfront planning. We have a required diagnostics process. This is where some of our experts come in and sit down and actually walk through what the entire project is going to look like from those first few weeks, where we're doing that sprint cycle, where we're going through the design process, through to the testing phase, through to the actual go live. Through all of that, we want to plan out every single data migration. We want to know exactly what data we're pulling from where, how we're going to do it, well as every single integration, data points. One integration might be a lot of different data flows. So we don't just consider that a single integration with X system to Y system. It's more, we're pulling this data, this data, this data from this system, and then returning other data. So really that planning portion is just incredibly important. We can't find every single thing, unfortunately, but everything we can identify up front is a risk avoided. The most important part to having a flexible scope is not quite having a flexible scope, but having a strong relationship between the customer and the partner. We don't want to just leave holes in scope because we know things might change. We want to instead have that expectation up front that if we do find something that needs to change, we then can have that open and honest conversation. We're not here to try and nickel and dime a customer out of scope creep that changes during the project. We want to have a successful project because we are on this team together. That's something that we need to be setting that expectation up front, that if something does change, here's the process for that. We're going to sit down, have this conversation. Does this mean that we need to take something else out in order to accommodate this? Or do we need to add additional resources, add additional timeline? Or do we need to take away timeline? Can we do this with one less resource because, hey, we don't need this portion of the system anymore? So that's something that we just have to have a shared expectation up front. One of the aspects of implementing a SaaS product, a cloud solution that is evergreen, right? Microsoft is always releasing updates for Business Central, is that, hey, maybe midway through a project, Microsoft comes out or announces a new feature. And this is a game changer for the business. This is something that, had we known it was coming up front, we absolutely would have put it into the project. These sorts of things absolutely happen. And that's something that, we don't want to be so inflexible on the scope to say, hey, this is not something that we can accommodate, but we'll actually reach out and say, this is something that we found that is coming or has already been added in the system. It can be a game changer for your business. It would be a huge process improvement. Let's talk about adding this. So it really needs to be that conversation. It isn't something that, hey, we can just fold in tons of new things without having that conversation of how it affects the project as a whole. Those types of actions actually are higher risk to the overall success of the project. Instead, We need to have a planned out approach to how we're going to approach adding additional scope and then mitigating that risk of, hey, we're going to do more in the same timeline with the same resources, or do we need to add people?